Today on the History of Politics, we're going to talk about the last of the 7 articles of the Constitution. There are 7 articles in total. We've already gone through the first article. The first 3 deal with the co-equal branches of government. The first one is the legislative branch, which vests Congress with all of the legislative power, the lawmaking power. The second being the executive branch, which executes the laws that Congress makes, which is the president and vice president, their election thereof, and their powers and duties, so on and so forth. The third deals with the last of the co-equal branches of government, the judicial branch. It establishes the Supreme Court. It establishes the federal courts through acts of Congress, and it outlines their power as well. Article 4 establishes the Constitution as the law of the land, and it also discusses the relationship between the states and the federal government. Article 5 is dealing with dealt with how the Constitution is to be amended. The steps, the procedures on how a proposal of an amendment is made and what constitutes that proposal. Article 6, which we talked about yesterday, is the 3 clauses. Okay, the debt clause, the establishment clause, not the establishment clause, the supremacy clause, and finally the oath clause. And now today we're discussing Article 7, which is very short, very simple, and it discusses the ratification of the Constitution itself, how it was ratified. And it's a very short, very simple text. And what it says is the ratification of the conventions of the 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. What does that mean? Well, we already know that the ratification process requires 3/4 of the states. So at the time, and this is why it says the 9 states is sufficient, because at the time we only had 13 states. Remember Betsy Ross, the flag, 13 stars in a circle? We only had 13 states at the time of the framing and ratifying and signatures on the Constitution. So since we have to have a 3/4 agreement, 3 times 4 is 12. You have 13. So it's 1 more, but you have to round it off. So 3 times 3 is 9. That's 3/4. Okay? Because 4/4 is 12, and you would have 1 left over. Okay? But that 1 still couldn't overturn the process. You've got 9. That's sufficient. That's 3/4. So that ratified the Constitution, and and what it means is that the Constitution now applies to the entirety of the states. It covers those 9 states that ratified it, plus it actually covers the whole of what's known as the United States. Okay? I know it might be a little confusing, but this is how, it's so funny because if you study law, this is what makes it difficult for the average person. Because when you read law, it's very redundant. How many people, for example, just to, by a show of hands or whatever, how many of you, when you get some kind of a contract, whether it's for a credit card, for a cell phone service, how many of you actually take the time to read all of that small print? It's difficult unless you're extremely familiar with it, because then you can kind of cut through the nonsense and get to the meat of it. But a lot of that stuff is very, very, very redundant. And that can be confusing to most people. But what it's about is the law itself has to cover all of the bases. That's the way it's made. It has to cover the basis, the contingencies, all of that good stuff. And especially when you're talking about establishing a country, a nation, for God's sake. But we still have to remember why we did it. One day we might do a discussion on the Declaration of Independence, which should be very interesting, because the Declaration of Independence was the beginning of our secession from Great Britain and the tyranny of King George III. How many of you know what the Boston Tea Party was all about? Because if you don't, in simple terms, it was about taxes, okay? The colonists, the colonizers, the settlers wanted tea. It came from Britain. It showed up here. King George wanted taxes paid for it. It was too much. So they revolted and they threw that tea in the sea. They threw it in the water. They said, the hell with it. We're not paying for that. We're not paying all that tax. We're not going to do it. So they sent King George back zero. Can't say that they stole it because they threw it into the sea. So they didn't steal it. It's not like they kept it. They got rid of it. That was a protest. The whole problem was that the settlers came here to establish this land as a new land. But they were getting support from King George. King George wanted tariffs, duties, if you will, tribute, if you want to call it, and he wanted a lot. A lot. You know, when you put too much weight on the backs of people, eventually they're going to snap. And this is what was taking place. And when they didn't want to pay it, he sent soldiers here. He sent soldiers to collect. And yeah, he didn't care if he killed you or not. Either you pay or you die. This is where America came from if you didn't know it. I know that since Ronald Reagan, like the school books aren't up to date. They don't teach you what they should be teaching you. You have to study history. All of this is what said, hey, the settlers said to themselves, why are we going through this? We're here. We're building this land. We're doing the work and we're not getting anything for it. We have to pay for everything. We have to send this man. And then when we don't send it or don't have it to send, here he comes and he wants to kill everybody. I'm not going to do it. And that's where the Declaration of Independence came. We've had enough of your tyranny. We had enough of your nonsense. We're over here building this land. We'll keep it for ourselves. Not going to pay you a damn thing else. And that's why you have these laws. And that's why you have the Constitution, which is the very heart of everything. And that Constitution shares a vision that the settlers had of how this country should be. But we've gone so far away from that. And it's been helped along by a lot of these politicians. As was once said, men in denim built this country and men in suits are destroying it. We need to get back to those men in denim. Yes, we do. We need to get back to the American dream. We need to get back to the values instead of turning our backs on people and trying to lock them out. We need to bring them in. It's time for that bigoted attitude that stole this country from the indigenous people of this country to end. We're better, stronger together than separate. I've been saying it for a long time. But MAGA, you guys just want to keep separating and dividing. No matter what you talk about, you want to keep that supremacy attitude? Fine. You know what? You'll find out in the long run. In any event, if you learned something today, please comment. Respectful discourse is always welcome, but be warned that if you say anything disrespectful, you're going to get it back before you get blocked and deleted. It's going to happen like that. Otherwise, like, share, and I'll see you on the next one.